metres in front. There we have it. It continues. What do you make of this issue, just on a final thought, Peter Dunn?
Look, our success has come because of our isolation, because of the fact we're an island nation thousands of kilometres away from anyone else. We've been able to...
But not merely.
Pretty much so, really.
Well, Britain?
Well,
UK?
It's not that far away from Europe. But the point I'm making is that we should focus on our own efforts and making sure we're safe here rather than worry about how we're perceived by the rest of the world.
All right, Team New Zealand 9 seconds behind on leg 4 of 6. Stay tuned to RNZ National. For the meantime, Sue Bradford, Peter Dunn, you've been fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere ake nei, hold on to your little red socks.
We're down at Auckland's Viaduct Basin where Team New Zealand attempt to take the 36 America's Cup. We'll keep you updated with all the action throughout tonight's show.
And lost in communication, why didn't our Foreign Minister give the PM a heads up about a 15-year-old deportee? National reckons what's rubbish is New Zealand's relationship with Australia. And on that note, is political scratchiness deflating prospects of a trans-Tasman bubble? Deaths from ovarian cancer outstrip the road toll. A leading Waikato tourism business says thanks but no thanks to more money from a controversial government fund. And a cracker of an update on Egg Boy.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. Team New Zealand and Luna Rossa have been locked in a tight battle in race 9 of the America's Cup match. The Italians led by just 1 second at the first gate and extended that advantage out to 8 seconds by gate number 2. A short time ago, Luna Rossa maintained a lead of less than 100 metres during the third of 6 legs. Team New Zealand lead the best of 13 series 5-3. The Foreign Minister is defending her decision not to inform the Prime Minister about the imminent arrival of a 15-year-old deportee from Australia, saying the right people knew. The boy arrived in New Zealand on a recent flight, but the circumstances around his deportation are not public. Jacinda Ardern only found out yesterday after media inquiries. The boy is now in managed isolation, being supported by Oranga Tamariki. Foreign Minister Nanaia Mahuta says she was informed by Australia last Wednesday.
Once I became aware that there were matters involving a minor and those considerations needed to be taken account of in determining a way forward, that is what I that is what I kept my focus on.
Nanaia Mahuta indicated today the boy's visa was not cancelled under Australia's contentious 501 policy. National says trans-Tasman relations haven't been this bad since the Muldoon years. The Canterbury District Health Board insists appropriate PPE was used when a person who had not yet completed 14 days in managed isolation visited Christchurch Hospital. The person was given an exemption to see a patient yesterday. The DHB's executive lead for COVID-19, Ralph LaSalle, says a plan was in place to protect staff, other visitors and patients. Officials almost finalised a trans-Tasman bubble last month, but Australia decided it wanted to be able to make independent decisions. There were indications the bubble would open before the end of this month, but that is looking increasingly unlikely. The COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says in early February the terms for a joint decision-making framework for quarantine-free travel were almost agreed, but he says Australia decided it wanted to be able to make independent decisions. He told the House what work needed to be done before two-way travel can commence.
Understanding the circumstances that could lead to a suspension of green zone travel on either side of the Tasman, what we would do with those whose travel is disrupted by the suspension of a green zone, testing requirements that may be required or may be put in place on either side, Australia's current exit visa restriction that prevents Australians travelling to New Zealand without a visa.
Chris Hipkins. Unions say there is a chance a buyer could salvage the machinery from the Whakatane mill. The mill is a major Bay of Plenty employer and has today confirmed a proposal to close after 85 years in business. First Union and Air2 say more than 150 skilled workers face redundancy, but the plant could be used by the forestry supply industry. Air2 spokesperson Raymond Wheeler says the closure is devastating for a region already hit hard by the COVID pandemic and the Whakaari volcanic disaster. The mill proposed the closure last month after losing its biggest customer, a Swiss packaging company. The government is defending its decision to allow dozens of workers into the country for the Lion King musical. The Disney Broadway production will premiere in the country in June at Auckland's Spark Arena. National Party's COVID-19 response spokesperson Chris Bishop says there's no clear criteria for critical workers. Deputy Prime Minister Grant Robertson says it's a balancing act.
We've tried throughout the process to be able to make sure we prioritise bringing New Zealanders back in, but we have been able to allocate spaces to allow things like concerts, sports events to go on. I think that's good. New Zealanders have appreciated that. It's very small numbers relative to the more than 120,000 people who've been through managed isolation.
Grant Robertson. Facebook will pay Rupert Murdoch's News Corp Australia for journalism. The deal comes weeks after Australia passed a controversial world-first law aimed at making tech platforms pay for news content. News Corp has not disclosed the amount for the 3-year contract in Australia, but the deal will cover all of the company's content. It's 4.5 minutes past 5. As you heard in the news, racing is underway and incredibly tight in race 8 of the America's Cup on the Waitematā harbour in Auckland. A short time ago, challengers Luna Rossa were narrowly ahead of Team New Zealand, but the lead has changed several times. Luna Rossa led around the first mark, but by just 1 second, and increased that to 8 at the second and then out 9 seconds at the third. Team New Zealand lead the best of 13 series, 5 races to 3. The Hurricanes won't be pushed into moving All Black Geordie Barrett from full black to first 5 amid mounting injury problems. Barrett replaced an injured Jackson Garden-Batchip in the second half of their loss to the Crusaders last round, and the regular first 5 is in doubt for this weekend's match against the Chiefs. But the Hurricanes have confirmed they won't be putting Barrett in the number 10 jersey. Liverpool remain in the hunt for a top 4 finish in England's Football's Premier League after a 1-0 win over Wolverhampton Wanderers. The win lifts Liverpool to 6th, 5 adrift of 4th placed Chelsea and 2 behind 5th placed West Ham, who have a game in hand. That's the news.
Australia's bad behaviour.
I think it is time to recognise that Australia is actually behaving like a rogue nation.
Police investigate their own bias.
Unconscious bias affects every individual. People use the word racism to mean different things. If you say racism to our officers, they will feel like we are calling them individually racist.
And the Oscar nominees are
2 women directors nominated for Best Director, first time in history.
A showstopper. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, mostly cloudy with a few showers. Waikato to Wellington, also Bay of Plenty, Central North Island and Wairarapa. Scattered rain clearing this evening, fine weather tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay partly cloudy, a few showers spreading north this evening. Nelson, Bulla, Westland and Marlborough except Kaikoura Coast. Fine apart from a few showers in Bulla, clearing today. Canterbury and Kaikoura Coast showers, some heavy with thunderstorms and hail spreading north today, clearing from the south. Fine with morning and evening cloud tomorrow. For Otago, Southland and Fiordland except Clutha, fine spells, a few showers, especially in the south, clearing tomorrow afternoon. In Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy, rain tonight, brief clear skies tomorrow morning, then showers tomorrow evening. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Tonight, more trouble over the bubble. Has this issue turned sharply political? But first, Team New Zealand is eyeing up the Auld Mug, hoping to win both races in the America's Cup this evening to successfully defend the oldest cup in sport. Racing was delayed by about half an hour, adding to the tension. Our reporter Nick Trubridge is at the America's Cup Village at the Auckland Viaduct. Nick, what is the latest?
Hi Lisa, yeah, well it is all go down here at the Viaduct in Auckland. Team New Zealand have just taken the lead off Luna Rossa, Prada Pirelli. It's a really, really close race down here, Lisa, as you can hear from the crowd noise. They've retained that lead right now. Team New Zealand won the start of this race but ended up falling behind Luna Rossa. They came close to passing them a couple of times and finally have done so now. Lisa, just like yesterday, it's a Tuesday down here in Auckland, at Auckland's Viaduct, but you could be forgiven for thinking it's a Friday or Saturday. There are plenty of people around.
So how are the crowds feeling down there?
Yeah, Lisa, there's certainly a lot of tension. Obviously, the backstory here is that Team New Zealand would need to win both races today to take this 36th America's Cup. They're in the lead of this one right now. It remains to be seen whether there will be another race today. Obviously, that's wind dependent. But Team New Zealand fans, Lisa, are fairly confident that if there is a second race, they can get it done. I spoke to a few of those fans a little bit earlier, and here's what they had to say. What do you think the chances are today? What are you hoping for today?
Well, I'm hoping they'll win twice. And I think if we get a good, steady, strong wind, that's on the cards.
2-0.
Simple as that?
Simple as that, 2-0.
2-0, hooray!
I think we're just going to finish them off today, pretty much, I reckon. It's going to be all over.
I think they're going to go quite good, but I don't want to jinx anything.
You don't want to jinx anything, so you're hoping for the best, but you don't want to get too excited just yet.
No, I don't want to get too excited at all.
You guys both are quietly confident, but you're just sort of tempering your expectations a little bit.
Don't jinx anything. Yeah, don't jinx anything. Don't jinx anything, people!
We're going to fresh it today.
2-0?
2-0.
Taking home the cup.
Taking home the cup today.
We're getting all our fingers crossed to hope that they get home today.
Who painted your face?
My mum.
and explain what you've got on your face. It's a fairly familiar boat, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the New Zealand boat. Yeah, it's been really fun. It's way better than school.
I'm hopeful. They did very well yesterday and they're just getting better and better. Yeah, so hopefully they can do it.
I think they're going to go fantastic because the comeback yesterday just raised everyone's expectations and they'll know that and they'll be battling as every trick they can use to win those two races.
Not worried about Spittle today?
No, not worried about him.
That's another reason for us to win, isn't it? Beating an Aussie.
Oh yeah, but our guys are just as good as him, if not better, so they can handle it.
Yeah, no, we don't want to let him in. No chances for him. He's all over.
And that was Nick Truebridge there at the Viaduct talking to punters. And we're just coming up to the finish, I think. Are we? New Zealand is still ahead. And Team New Zealand has just gone over the line. That's another one for us. Let's go to our reporter, Louise Tenuth, who's joining us now from North Head on Auckland's North Shore. Louise, a lot of people over there soaking up the atmosphere. What's the reaction been?
Well, Lisa, I'm sure you can hear behind me. There are plenty of cheers here. There's a huge crowd as well. Awesome viewing point here at North Head. I've spoken to many people here, plenty of them taking time off school and work just to watch the races. Obviously, they want to see both go across the line, but even just to see one is enough from them. There's some avid fans here and everyone's gunning for Team New Zealand, but as you can hear behind me, the excitement is high.
Thanks, Louise. That is Louise Tenuth, who is on North Head, on Auckland's North Shore. And with the change of course today, that's where they get an excellent view. Now, our sports reporter, Joe Porter, has just joined me in the studio. Joe, talk us through it.
Yeah, well, a real race, wasn't it? Just like we saw yesterday, an actual match racing for the America's Cup, which has been incredibly exciting, of course, because we haven't had it so far. So, yeah, a real match racing race. Jimmy Spittle taking the early honours, taking it at the start, leading around all four gates at the first 4 out of 5 or 6, and then, of course, Luna Rossa maintaining a lead of around 180 metres throughout most of the race, but of course Team New Zealand always there with these changes in wind directions, and it was a crucial mistake from Luna Rossa. A lot of people say when you're leading in these yacht races you should cover the opposition, make sure that they can't get ahead of you. In fact, Luna Rossa had been doing the opposite during the race, and the one time they did decide to cover, it was a big mistake. It gave Team New Zealand and Peter Burling the opportunity they needed, and of course the lead changed on the 5th leg. Team New Zealand led into gate 5 and just dominated leg 6, completely blowing the Italians out of the water. I think they led by over 500 metres at some point. So a great race from Jimmy Spittle, but a crucial error, and Team New Zealand pounced, and that was that.
Yeah, so Jimmy Spittle is tough mentally, right?
Oh,
He's
yeah.
come back from nowhere before, but looking at the situation now, they're very clearly the underdog. One more and it's all over, Red Rover. I mean, Can he claw anything back from this?
Well, look, this is Jimmy Spittle. He's probably the most competitive person on the planet. We all saw what happened in the America's Cup before Bermuda, when, of course, Team New Zealand had their massive lead, only one race to go, and then, Larry Ellison and the American team just managed to go away and come up with something better and come back and win every single race. So you can never count anyone out, and especially not Jimmy Spittle. He's the fiercest competitor on the planet. You could hear it in his voice. He knew he'd made that crucial mistake, but he won't stop fighting till the bitter end. And you can't say that about a lot of athletes out there. He is the ultimate competitor, and I wouldn't count him out. Luna Rossa have some work to do. We all saw Team New Zealand were low and fast compared to what they were in this race, but they're not out of it yet. Good tactics at the start, one crucial mistake. That's all it took.
So, obviously, break between races at the moment. Are conditions good to go ahead with the second race at this point?
The wind is definitely going to, it's above the lower limit we need, so racing can continue. It'll be a matter of time. Can they get this race starting before 6 p.m, which is the cut-off? If they can, then, of course, Team New Zealand tonight have the opportunity to defend this America's Cup on home soil, which is incredibly exciting. They'll be desperate to get back out there. Jimmy Spittle and Luna Rossa probably wouldn't mind a time delay or some shifty winds that delay the start to later than 6 o'clock, because that, of course, gives them a day to regroup, a day to get their thoughts together and come back for another jab at Team New Zealand tomorrow. Whereas you'd think the momentum, the confidence, all with Team New Zealand right now, Luna Rossa would quite like to go to another day, I believe.
Thanks, Joe. Well, we will keep across it and bring you updates as they happen. It is almost 5:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. So Team New Zealand is just one win away from the America's Cup. And as we said, we will keep you updated throughout the show on that second race. But let's get to some other news now. The government has confirmed officials were close to finalising a Trans-Tasman bubble last month. But Australia backed out of the deal and changed its position. Talks between the two countries have been ongoing for months, but we're still no closer to quarantine-free travel across the ditch. And in other bubble news, it's bubble, toil and trouble for the Cook Islands. Its Prime Minister, Mark Brown, is set to visit New Zealand next week, but has today been revealed to be facing fraud charges. Here's political reporter Katie Scotcher.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern first offered this glimmer of hope to battered businesses in May last year.
Today I can confirm that I've accepted Prime Minister Morrison's invitation to participate via video link in the Australian National Cabinet meeting scheduled for tomorrow. The meeting will discuss a range of matters in relation to the COVID response on both sides of the Tasman, including the creation of a Trans-Tasman travel bubble.
But after 9 months and a dozen rounds of talks, not much more has happened, raising questions about the current state of talks between the two countries.
Have the formal discussions between the New Zealand and Australian government over the Trans-Tasman bubble fallen over?
No, not at all.
The COVID-19 Minister, Chris Hipkins, has, however, clarified that officials were close to reaching an agreement at the start of February.
We were looking, we were relatively comfortable with where things were heading. We were sort of on track. Since then, Australia's position shifted, so we've had to recalibrate.
Australia changed its mind, deciding it wanted to be able to make independent decisions.
Look, these things happen.
The independent approach Australia wants to take will be more challenging for the government to manage. And as Chris Hipkins explained during question time, there's a lot to work through.
Understanding the circumstances that could lead to a suspension of green zone travel on either side of the Tasman, what we would do with those whose travel is disrupted by the suspension of a green zone, testing requirements that may be required or may be put in place on either side, Australia's current exit visa restriction that prevents Australians travelling to New Zealand without a visa.
But after many months and many discussions, the National Party wants the bubble open now. It has launched a petition calling on the government to take immediate action, although it appears it won't have much sway.
I think that's more about the National Party wanting to collect people's email addresses.
National leader Judith Collins says there's no reason the Trans-Tasman bubble can't happen now.
Queenstown and other towns that are dependent on tourism are actually dying, and if the Prime Minister doesn't essentially pull finger and get on with this, we're going to end up with the death of Queenstown on her.
How many jobs would be saved by opening the Trans-Tasman bubble immediately in places like Rotorua, Taupo, Queenstown and the West Coast?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in order to be able to answer that very, very specific question, we would need to know a lot about the behaviour of the Australians.
And her party piled on the pressure in the House, using every opportunity during question time to challenge the government.
Our premise is a principled one, Mr. Speaker, that we will do this in the interests of New Zealanders and making sure that we have the right safeguards in place.
But the Trans-Tasman bubble is not the only one the government is working on. It's also looking at two-way travel between the Cook Islands and New Zealand. Its Prime Minister, Mark Brown, is set to visit New Zealand next week, the first visit by a leader since COVID-19 closed our borders. The announcement has boosted hopes that a travel bubble between the two countries will be confirmed. But just 24 hours after Jacinda Ardern announced his visit, news broke that he is facing charges of fraud. Despite that, he's still planning to arrive here next Thursday. Atu i te whare parimata, mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scott Churaho.
Political scratchiness could be behind delays in getting a Trans-Tasman bubble to fly, according to a group tasked with getting it off the ground. The Australia-New Zealand Leadership Forum has been working solidly for more than 10 months on an agreement to get quarantine-free travel between the two countries off the ground, with two-way tourism trade worth more than $5 billion. Every time it seems a bubble is closed, there's been setbacks, including new community COVID cases. Now, Oz is eyeing up a new bubble buddy, Singapore. And yesterday, Jacinda Ardern said things had got more complicated after Australia moved the goalposts. And Sherry is the co-chair of the Leadership Forum. I'm sorry to start with this, Anne, but you nominated a deadline of the end of March to get, well, hopefully a Trans-Tasman bubble out of the starting gate. And, well, the clock is ticking down. So what's the deal? Where are things at?
Well, we've got 2 weeks to go, so never say never. And, I mean, everything's ready to go. The aviation sector's ready to go. We've been working on all the protocols for months. On the Australian side, there hasn't been a single case of COVID as a result of us having our borders open to Kiwis, and there's virtually no community transmission either side of the Tasman. So I think the reasons for keeping the border walls up diminished by the day, and we continue to hope that there's still the light at the end of the tunnel by the end of March. We're continuing to push, and of course vaccinations now in full swing on both sides of the Tasman as well. So we're running out of reasons to keep the borders with limitations.
Anne, are you an optimist or a realist?
Oh, I'm probably a bit of both. I'm optimistic, but I'm realistic that I can't control the politics. But I'm optimistic because I know so much work has been done. And at the end of the day, you run out of excuses. You run out of reasons not to do things. And of course, Singapore is pushing at our collective doors as well, but particularly the Australian door. So, I have a very strong view that we want to be open to New Zealand first, but I'm realistic enough to know that if that doesn't happen, then we're having exactly the same conversations with Singapore. But I don't want the Australia-New Zealand border to follow somebody else. My strong preference is for us to demonstrate the partnership we've had for such a long time and trust each other's systems and processes and all the work that we've done to put stuff in place and just get it happening.
You mentioned the politics. So what are the politics here? Because it seems everybody's ready, right? We've talked to our airport. They're ready to go. They say they can fire up within 3 days if we were to fling open the borders to Australia. So people are ready. Operators are ready. So what are the politics that are the handbrake to this?
Look, I honestly don't know, but I'm watching peripheral political scratchiness happen, which I sort of have, my instincts say, well, maybe that it's not just about COVID borders, it's about all of the other issues as well. And I'm hoping both governments have sufficient trust in each other and maturity to just see how much value and opportunity there is that we're locking out. And so I honestly don't really know. I don't sit in either of the cabinets, but I do know they do keep talking about it, and that there's a moment at which hopefully we're going to unleash this, and all that work that's been done at airports, at airlines, at hotel, everywhere to get this working will actually get off the ground.
And you're not in the cabinet meetings, but you are a keen observer, right? So
Yep.
You're talking about some of the scratchiness on the outer of the political arena there. What are you talking about? You're talking about the fact that Australia is shipping back deportees to New Zealand, and there's some political push and shove going on in other areas that might be spilling over into the Trans-Tasman bubble.
Well, it's got to be something, because it's not the logic of what's happening with COVID. So I think this is a complex game. The politics between nations has complexity as well as logic at play, and there clearly is a bit of tension around shipping back to New Zealand people that Australia thinks should go back to New Zealand, and I understand the New Zealand government isn't happy about that, and there's been a bit of snarkiness about it on the Australian side as well. But I honestly, the reason we need to get our own borders open between Australia and New Zealand is that we're all also looking at the Pacific, who are sitting with most of their jobs dependent on tourism. Most of the income of those countries, other than foreign aid, is tourism related, and we're their biggest markets. And we're rolling out vaccines in the Pacific to ensure that that they're safe as well. I think there's a bigger picture at play here, which I'm hoping cuts through some of the smaller issues that seem to be creating a bit of scratchiness. We've got a region that's desperately in need of tourism to get back on their feet as well.
So, Anne, though, bottom line, do you think that there is a little bit of political puffery in the background that is stopping this getting over the line at the moment?
Well, it's not. I can't see logic, so there has to be something else, whether it's political puffery or whatever. But I just don't want our collective interest to be left behind, for Singapore to jump in over the top, for the Pacific to be left hanging. There's a lot at stake now, and I'm hoping that by the end of this month we can come together and in fact use the experience we've already had. The Australians who've gone to New Zealand who've been in quarantine, not a single one of them has tested positive. Of the Kiwis coming to Australia with all the systems that are in place and no hotel quarantine, there has not been a single case. So we've tested the systems, they work, people have behaved well, let's get the borders open.
There are a couple of things that have been raised in the debate around the Trans-Tasman bubble, so let's see if we can clear some of them up. What would happen if New Zealanders are over in Australia as tourists and Australia chooses to close the border because of an outbreak? Who picks up the tab for that unexpected extension of their stay in Australia because they simply cannot get out?
Well, what's been happening domestically, I can tell you the answer because it's been happening between states in Australia. If you get stuck, then you pay, or you find someone to stay with. That's what's been happening even between state borders in Australia.
What about if a Kiwi was diagnosed with COVID while in Australia? What are the reciprocal responsibilities in terms of looking after them? Do you ship them out of the country, or do you look after them in the country they're in?
No, and there are very good and long-established reciprocal protocols on health. So if you get sick here, you'd be treated as anyone would be treated here. You'd be looked after in the system. You'd go, the hospitals would welcome, all of that stuff actually. There's no debate about that. That would happen even without COVID.
On the subject of Singapore, Anne, if they're in, are we out?
No, but it's not an either or. Hopefully it's an and, but I'd like New Zealand to be first. So Singapore, I think, is putting a different offering really together, because they're offering to hub foreign students there for 2 weeks actually to do their quarantine in Singapore. So their offering is a much broader one, similarly for Australians coming back, so that the number of hotel quarantine spaces in Australia is one of the limitations to getting more Australians stranded overseas back into the country. And I understand that Singapore is offering a system that allows some people at least to quarantine in Singapore. So their offering is different, but it would be, the New Zealand-Australian work, all of it builds on the work that we've done, thinking about the Trans-Tasman bubble. So it would be a shame that the Trans-Tasman bubble work ends up being a bubble with somebody else. I would prefer that New Zealand go first, not second.
And do you actually think that the New Zealand government wants this Trans-Tasman bubble to go ahead?
I think you need to ask them that. I have assumed that they want it to go ahead. Perhaps that's a question directly to them.
And that is Anne Sherry, who is the co-chair of the Leadership Forum. Now, we're keen for your feedback on that one. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. What do you think is holding up the Trans-Tasman bubble? Is there something that's not in place, or is it simply politics? Are we at loggerheads with Australia? Let us know your thoughts. Foreign Minister Nanaia Mahuta has defended her decision not to give the Prime Minister a heads up about the deportation of a teenager from Australia. The 15-year-old is in managed isolation and is being supported by 2 Oranga Tamariki staff on site. The circumstances around the deportation of the minor are described as complex, are still being kept private, but Ms Mahuta has signalled he's not a 501 deportee. It's just the latest incident to ratchet up Trans-Tasman tensions, which the opposition says haven't been so bad since the Muldoon years. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Rubbing salt into the wound is this latest deportation. The Prime Minister only found out yesterday after media inquiries, but Foreign Minister Nanaia Mahuta was informed by Australia last Wednesday. She says the right people at the time were alerted.
At an officials level, those who needed to know were aware of this particular issue. At a political level, once I became aware that there were matters involving a minor and those considerations needed to be taken account of in determining a way forward, that is what I kept my focus on.
Deputy Prime Minister Grant Robertson was not critical of that decision, saying it was being dealt with as a consular matter, but it may be scrutinised further.
I think, we'll have to have a look and see whether or not there was an opportunity to say anything earlier than that, but ultimately it was being dealt with by the agencies you'd expect it to be.
The Foreign Minister was aware of it, so should that have been passed on?
So the Foreign Affairs Minister was certainly aware of the fact that there was a consular case and a case involving a minor. I wouldn't necessarily say that the Foreign Minister had all the information about, what flight and all of that they were on.
Australia's Home Affairs has outlined a range of circumstances under which someone can be deported, but wouldn't say which one applied to the boy. Today, however, Nanaia Mahuta said people shouldn't jump to the conclusion he's a 501 deportee. She says the circumstances are complex, but the 15-year-old has family here and in Australia.
We have worked to ensure that Oranga Tamariki is looking for the most suitable solution and keeping the family involved in that process.
Nationals Jerry Brownlee says the government should be more transparent.
The New Zealand public need to know more about the details of why this child has been sent to New Zealand and where that child's family supports most strongly lie.
National leader Judith Collins says relations are at an historic low, and Jacinda Ardern needs to refresh the relationship with Australia and Scott Morrison.
I think it's very bad for New Zealand to have a relationship that is not one of respect and mutual, a bit of mutual ribbing from time to time. We have to do it.
What about a bit of mutual respect? Doesn't it flow both ways?
It does.
We haven't seen much of that from Australia.
Well, I think you're going to find it gets worse unless there is actually an end to what we're seeing as these verbal shots going on.
She also had a crack at the senior Australian minister for his comments last week about 501 deportees and taking out the trash.
It was a pretty poor call for, say, Minister Peter Dutton to come out and start talking about sending out the trash to New Zealand in the same week that we were commemorating what happened with an Australian who came here and killed 50 odd people in New Zealand and injured so many more.
Grant Robertson denies this has driven a deeper rift with Australia, as deportations have long been a bone of contention.
This is a long-standing difference of opinion between New Zealand and Australia, the deportation of Australians to New Zealand, 501s.
Doesn't this ratchet it up, though, 15-year-old being deported?
It's a further example of why we have significant concerns about Australia's policy, and we've laid out those concerns in public on many occasions.
Australia's Home Affairs says it approaches visa cancellations of minors with a high degree of caution and consultation and complies with its legal obligations in circumstances where the removal of a minor is considered, including those under the Convention of the Rights of the Child. Nanaia Mahuta said New Zealand's had no advice that suggests Australia has breached any international law. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Well, let's go back to the America's Cup village at the viaduct. If you are listening on radio, we're cutting to some pictures now, which is, well, an absolutely heaving viaduct basin with some excited looking people squeezed in there shoulder to shoulder in front of the big screen that will display the next race. And that second race today is expected to be at 5:45. It's the absolute cliffhanger. It's match point, if you like. It's all in our favour at the moment. We need one more win to take away the America's Cup. Exciting stuff. And as I say, the crowd down there is huge, huge, anticipating this last race. And we will obviously bring you all the details of what happens next. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, deaths from ovarian cancer outstrip road fatalities. The Salvation Army is lukewarm on an independent body to handle abuse claims, and a teen's scramble to make good use of the notoriety he gained from egging a mouthy politician. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Don't forget you can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email us checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's get to the headlines now with Susanna.
Team New Zealand has defeated Luna Rossa in race 9 of the America's Cup after a tense battle this afternoon. In the closest race yet, Luna Rossa led around the first 4 marks, but Team New Zealand pulled ahead on the 5th leg to round the final mark 18 seconds in front. They then increased the lead to win comfortably by half a minute. Team New Zealand is just 1 win away from keeping the cup, with the next race due to start in a few minutes' time. The Foreign Minister, Nanaia Mahuta, is defending her decision not to inform the Prime Minister about the imminent arrival of a 15-year-old deportee from Australia, saying the right people knew. The boy arrived on a recent flight, but the circumstances around his deportation are not public. Jacinda Ardern only found out yesterday after media inquiries. The boy is now in managed isolation, being supported by Oranga Tamariki. Tourism Minister Stuart Nash says reports of the death of Queenstown are premature. The National Party leader Judith Collins has ramped up calls for a trans-Tasman bubble, saying the Prime Minister will end up with the death of the resort town on her hands if she doesn't act soon. Stuart Nash says a bubble will go ahead when it's safe. Unions are hoping a buyer could salvage the machinery from the Whakatane mill. The mill is a major Bay of Plenty employer and has today confirmed it'll close after 85 years in business. First Union and Etu say more than 150 skilled workers face redundancy, but the plant could be used by the forestry supply industry. Facebook will pay Rupert Murdoch's News Corp Australia for journalism. The deal comes weeks after Australia passed a controversial world-first law aimed at making tech platforms pay for news content. News Corp says the deal will cover all of the company's content. A new poll shows 60% of New Zealanders rate housing as a top issue of concern for them. The Ipsos poll says it is the highest level since the survey began in 2018. After housing, the key issues of concern are poverty and inequality, and then inflation and the cost of living. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō, ko Lisa Owen Takawingwa, and this is Checkpoint. And it is time now for the business news with Nona Pelsier, who joins me in the studio. Nona, Briscoe's Group. Okay, so we've got their full year profit and sales. How did they do?
A lot better than, I guess, most people would have expected. I mean, their net profit rose 17% to $73.2 million. That's more than $10 million they made the year earlier. That's a net profit. And of course, their sales were up, but not by as much. Their sales rose 7.5%. So you might think, how come they made so much more as a net profit?
Enlighten us.
Yes, well, it's because of their strategy. So they changed up their strategy quite a bit. They looked at ways that they could improve their gross margin by their studying the supply chain, which we've heard so much about in the past year, about how that's added costs. So they looked at streamlining and a number of other measures, and that is where they got to. And so they're not finished yet. They said they're going to continue to look at what other things they can do to improve their profitability and look at new revenue streams. And so one of the things that was interesting, though, was that Briscoe Group's online sales rose 80% and now account for about 19% of all of their sales.
So did it go up during lockdowns and stay up, or
yes,
do we know?
Yes, they did. They did very well throughout, better than they expected. And I guess we've heard that over and over again about how the economy's going better and people are spending more money on their homes because they're spending more time there and so forth. So I guess it's not a surprise that this is a company with a big part of their business is homewares. And of course, the other part is Rebel Sports. So perhaps people were working out at home in front of the mirror, whatever now.
Buying the exercise gear so that they could do a few sit-ups out of eating the muffins that they had put in the trays that they bought from Briscoe's.
I would say that might. I'm sure Rod Duke has got a handle on that because he seems to have done pretty well out of it.
Let's talk about Infratil. So it's going to accept this offer. We talked about this with Nicholas around Tilt Renewables, but it's going to go ahead, is it?
Yes. Now, so this means that, for the people who might not remember what happened, an offer was made for Tilt Renewables, which, as it sounds, is a renewable energy company. Mercury is another shareholder in that company, and it's going to buy the New Zealand assets as part of this takeover. So they're going to pay, what I think, $750 million or something like that. And the rest is going to be owned by an Australian consortium. Infratil said, we're going to accept that offer. So that means they get to put about $1.9 billion is going to be their share in the pocket. They own 65.5% of Tilt. Now, interestingly, last year, some of our listeners might remember that Infratil was the subject of a takeover offer. And the offer at that time, I think, was like $5.4 billion. And Infratil said, no way, we're not accepting that. And now, because they're going to sell Tilt, it makes them a lot less interesting to that bidder, which was the Australian super fund. And that's because the Australian assets are going to be held by somebody else. And that's going to really leave the bulk of Infratil's Australian assets as data centers. So data centers might not be enough of an interest for the Australian super fund. It remains to be seen whether they renew their offer. Meanwhile, that's how our markets went today.
You bring some other numbers from the markets, do you know?
I do. Well, I want to just say that retailer Briscoe's Group share price rose 6%, and Infratil's, not surprising, their share price dropped 1%, and you would expect that. Okay, now what do we have? Well, the New Zealand dollar is trading around its 3-year high at 72 US cents, 92.8 Australian and 51.9 pence. Now, our market is doing quite well. We rose 0.8%, 97 points today, 12,689 was the closing number. And I guess all eyes are on the U.S. Federal Reserve meeting that's going to be taking place overnight, Tuesday, Wednesday. Thursday morning, we'll have an update on what that means to the markets. Everyone's expecting whatever they decide to move the markets. So watch this space.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Beltier with our business update there. A research project into police bias is being described as a watershed moment and could help drive transformational change. But some advocates are apprehensive, saying it could just become another report that collects dust. The research, Waikato University, a criminal justice advocate, is looking at how the police can ensure that everyone is getting fair treatment. Mani Dunlop reports.
That's the sound of the police. That's the sound of the beast. That's the sound of the police. That's the sound of the beast.
The relationship between police and Māori, and further people of colour around the world, has been proven to be wrought with racism and bias. Looking abroad, the Black Lives Matter movement has made waves in America and in other countries due to police brutality against African Americans. And here at home, police have acknowledged unconscious bias towards Māori and have a strategy in place to improve their relationship with tangata whenua. The research scope is clear in its language in addressing allegations of bias, and that objective research will either reassure the public the police are fair or not.
Police Commissioner Andrew Costa says the police want to understand the disproportionate statistics for Māori so it can do better.
Those statistics will tell a devastating story, actually, for Māori in terms of criminal justice. Police's part in that needs more examination. We have a range of challenges that occur upstream of policing that can lead to poor outcomes for Māori. We need to understand what our part of it is, and if we can get that insight, then we can have a conversation about the right way to shift it.
The use of the words racism and unconscious bias have been obvious, with the Commissioner not using the R word and fear it will be unhelpful.
People use the word racism to mean different things. If you say racism to our officers, they will feel like we are calling them individually racist. Whereas a lot of the advocates in this area, when they use the word racism, are talking about a system that consistently gets worse outcomes for one group of people than another.
Justice advocate Julia Waiporti says it's clear that racism does exist and it's unhelpful to not address it as that.
He's talking about when people fundamentally misunderstand what racism is, and you see this when there's such a fragile response to the word racism where people directly think that they've been accused of being racist. But you know what's more difficult than being accused of being racist is actually experiencing racism. And racism exists on an individual basis and on a systemic level, which is actually what they're looking at.
Kim Workman will chair an external group to provide expert advice to the research program. He has been a critic of the criminal justice system for the last 20 years, and Kim believes this project is different.
This is the first time that a chief executive has said, I want to dig deeper and find out exactly what's going on and see how we might improve our delivery systems. The Commissioner is concerned about the continuing publicity and assertions that bias exists. He's, I think, acknowledging that that's a real possibility. At the same time, he wants to make sure that his staff are protected. So it will be a major step forward on his part.
Mrs Waiporti says there is some hope with someone like Sir Kim at the helm. However, she says researching what is already known should not be the priority.
It's akin to launching a report into whether or not the All Blacks are a good rugby team. Yes, there's racism in policing. Yes, there are worse off outcomes for Māori as a direct result of policing. So launching another research pilot or anything like that, it's frustrating to see that. What we're really interested in is actually what are they going to do to change practice to make sure that they're not continuing essentially racist policing.
The first 3 months of the research will focus on data analysis, then will focus in detail on key areas where bias is most evident, such as stop and searches of people and searches without warrants. The scope, timeframe and those involved in the study are still yet to be finalised. For Checkpoint, this is Marnie Dunlop.
It's 6:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Well, our sports reporter Joe Porter is back in the studio with me. Bring us up to date. What's going on with this cliffhanger in the America's Cup racing?
Yeah, on match point, they're going to keep us waiting a little bit longer. The start of race 10 has been delayed to 5:55, 5 minutes to 6 because of shifting winds on course C. Obviously, the winds are still above the 6.5 minimum needed, but they're shifting and dropping about 9 knots and up and down at the moment. Also coming from a different direction, coming from the northwest rather than the southwest. So some shifting winds, they have dropped a bit. And of course, that's delayed the start of this race to make sure they've got the right conditions to go ahead. So 5:55, that doesn't leave them much time before 6 p.m, which is the official cut-off of when the race has to be started by to get it going. So if there's another delay to the race today, it looks like we're heading into Wednesday's racing.
Right, we're prolonging the agony or the joy, depending on which way you look at it.
That's right.
Okay, let's go back to race 1 for a second then, race 1 today. So you were listening to comms, you could hear on board Prada. What are they saying? What went wrong?
Well, look, the commentators and Prada were initially impressed by what they were doing. The commentators were saying Prada have made no mistakes. They've done everything right so far. Luna Rossa, taking the start, leading, like I said before, 4 of the 6 gates, 4 of the 5 gates. So a great start from them. However, there was that late shift, the late change where the wind made a bit of a move. They came across to try and cover Team New Zealand. Unfortunately, Jimmy Spittle got his timing wrong. They made a few mistakes on the shifts essentially and gave Team New Zealand an opening, which they took well, and then that was the end of the race. So Jimmy Spittle, you could hear as Team New Zealand led into turn 5, gate 5, going to that last leg where they opened up a huge lead. He sort of said, along the lines of, sorry guys, we got that one wrong, it's on me, bugger. You could almost hear him sort of conceding defeat at that point. And Francesco Bruni at the end said, look, we made some mistakes on shifts. We gave Team New Zealand one opportunity and they took it. Huge loss for us, but we still believe we can win races.
Thanks, Joe. We'll keep you up to date with what is happening there. But let's bring in our reporter, Nick Trubridge, who's actually down at the viaduct. Nick, you're in a bit of a holding pattern down there. What's going on?
Yeah, Lisa, it is a holding pattern down here. As you can see, a lot of the crowd behind me waiting with bated breath to see if Team New Zealand can wrap this race up. As Joe's just said, we're still waiting to see whether that 10th race will get going. Obviously, there's that 6 p.m. cut-off. If that race doesn't go ahead, well, all of these people will have to come back again tomorrow. So fair to say, Lisa, at the moment there are some beads of sweat dripping down the face. There are some short nails because people are nervous. They want to know, is this race going to get going? And they want to know whether, if this race does get going, whether Team New Zealand are going to be able to pull it out and take the 36 America's Cup. Now, we've spoken to a few more people about how they're feeling about this hold-up and about the rest of the racing today. Who are these guys?
This is Steve and Chips.
And you've brought them out to watch some yachting for the day?
Watch some yachting, and yes, Team New Zealand supporters.
What are the logistics of getting these guys into the viaduct?
I'm coming in. I just message through Instagram and bring them in the van, and here they are now. Yeah.
And I imagine you get plenty of people coming up to you and wanting pictures and so on and so forth?
Yes, one or two.
Have you been coming in most days?
From Sunday onwards we have been, yes. Yeah. So, and then we mix it up all over the place.
Go Team New Zealand!
Oh, I want New Zealand to win. Yeah, it would be great. It would be great to keep it here, the cup.
How are you going for today and how excited are you to be watching?
I'm really excited. I was down in the city before watching the boats going out, and now it's exciting to be at the island. Obviously we have to shift to be at the other side of North Head, but I'm really looking forward to the racing, hoping that Team New Zealand wins.
I'm going for Team New Zealand. I'm not from New Zealand, but my husband is, so I better say Team New Zealand.
And how excited are you to be here? I mean, it's a prime viewing point.
Oh, it's fabulous. I just hope the race starts.
You know, sort of watching all the coverage and avid fans yourselves?
Very much so. Most of it we've been watching from the barrier at the boating club there, but it's been wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
I came here for the first race, which was amazing to watch that, and because everyone was here and having picnics and watching it, and it was a nice day. And then I got really excited about it, and I thought, oh well, I come a bit more often now, and I watch it on TV too, yes.
So, Nick, some die-hard fans down there. In the background, we could see a few people wrapped in flags and all the rest of it. So I think we really need to test your allegiance. Can you ask the other Nick on camera to pan down to your socks, mate, and just lift up the end of your trouser? I just want to see what colour socks you're wearing today.
No, Lisa, I'd rather not. I mean, I do have a pair of red socks, but today I'm in blue. It is an ocean blue, though, so I suppose it is kind of sailing themed. But look, I do admit that I left the red socks at home in the washing machine. I do have several pairs though, so don't worry about that. I promise I am a Team New Zealand loyalist. You could also argue though that red is symbolic of the Italian team though as well, Lisa, so you kind of have to make a call, don't you? I've gone for the more neutral ocean blue. Lisa, still waiting to see if racing starts again here today. As I say, if not, all of these crowds will go home and have to come back again either tomorrow or on Thursday. So bated breath, we'll see what happens.
Thanks, Nick. If there is a delay, it gives you time to change your socks. That is Nick Trubridge down at the Viaduct Basin there. 2 years after cracking an egg on the bald head of an Aussie politician who made anti-Muslim statements on the same day as the Christchurch massacres, the teenager known as Egg Boy is harnessing his fame to raise money for good causes. 17 years old at the time, Melbourne teenager Will Connolly was so outraged about the comments. The next day, he rode his bike to a planned appearance by the senator. Let's jog our memories. Speaking to us at the time, Australian author Peter Fitzsimons describes the incident.
Fraser Anning is a rolled gold disgrace. He is an embarrassment
to our nation. In the wake of the catastrophe in Christchurch, he put out his views that it was all the fault. I mean, you just can't believe it. Not the fault of white supremacists, not the fault of horrible racists, but it was the fault of the Islamic community themselves. So Egg Boy is the 17-year-old who came up behind Fraser Anning the following day, and he had in his right hand an iPhone, in his left hand an egg, and he comes up behind him, and without violence, spluttered us against the back of his head. Now, he's become the real great talking point in Australia, because is he a hero? Is he a larrikin? Should he have been arrested, etc.? And what then happened was, Fraser Anning lashed out twice at him, but then Fraser Anning's bother boys, these heroes, throw this kid to the ground, put him in a vicious headlock. You heroes. You bloody heroes. Good on you. Did you hold him down, mate? Did you really think he was dangerous with that egg?
Well, Will Connolly, aka Egg Boy, is now helping raise money for New South Wales communities hit hard by last year's bushfires, none of which would have been possible, Will says, if it wasn't for the egging.
It's quite literally cracked my world wide open. I was able to meet all of these, inspiring, intelligent, motivated people, which I wouldn't have been able to without that. And on Instagram, when you're verified, you can message people and they come up first on everyone's thing as well. So just stuff like that has given me all these opportunities.
It's 2 years to the day since the egging.
Right, yeah, that's crazy.
So, Will, if we go back to that day for a second, a lot of people, they get upset or annoyed or offended by certain political comments, but they don't do anything. So what made you act?
The rawness of the shooting, and then watching the video, and then an hour later seeing the statements was just super weird and unhuman. And at the same time, I'm 17. I kind of, in the back of my mind, I knew I have a few more months to be 18 to break the law, and I just do silly stuff, random stuff all the time. I don't know, and it was honest. Part of it was attention for a group of my friends. That's why I filmed it on Snapchat. But no, nothing blowing up like how it did. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's a mix of things.
So I understand that you were here last year on the anniversary in Christchurch. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%. I went over and visited the mosques, and that was just one of the most. That was an experience, It's hard to speak about it, mate. Hard to put into words. I met Abdul Aziz, who was the hero there, who saved 40 people's lives, stared death in the eye and ran towards death to save everyone, and didn't end up dying, but far out, what a hero. And he's just hearing all the stories and actually learning a lot about Islam too. That was really interesting. So I learned a lot. It was a great experience.
At the time, there were some people who were critical of your actions. Do you have any regrets?
It's not really. It all happened how it happened. I'm pretty happy where I am right now, so I wouldn't have changed anything, nah.
It was people wanting to give to you for potential legal fees that you may face. In the end, you gave it to the victims of the Christchurch attacks. But was there a moment where you thought, you're 17 years old, that's a lot of money. Did you ever think, I could keep this?
100%. I wanted to, when it first started coming in, before it was any crazy amount, I was like, yeah, I'm going to get, the most amount of money I had in my bank account was $200 or something back then. So I've got thousands of dollars. I'm like, yeah, and then kept climbing. I'm thinking, holy shit, what's going on? I'm going to get all this money. And we're sitting around with the family watching it all. My uncle was like, why don't you donate some of it? I was like, what's going on? This isn't my money. And then there was the $100,000, and I thought, well, can I keep at least 30% of it? Can I keep some of it and donate the rest? And in the long term, that's not that much money, and it's not my money. And at the same time, I believe in karma in the sense of if you do good things for other people, you're going to get good things back, because that's just how the universe works. So I thought it'd be a smart decision to donate it all, and I think it's turned out pretty well.
So what do you think that it achieved? Whacking a politician over the head with an egg. Ultimately, what did it achieve?
That's a great question. It gave Islamic people a backbone in the sense of this kid has backed them up and gained like 500,000 followers. Wow, that there is support there, and it just slams down a politician who is being blatantly racist. And in Australia, there's just been way too much of that, and nothing's been done about it.
How do you think it's changed you, Will, in the past couple of years?
A lot. I've just been opened up to like all these amazing people, which is just like far out. At this convention I went to, like I met this lady going to Mars, met all these like shamans, these guys like building a rocket to the moon. Like what the hell's going on? Like I met all these awesome people and just soaking up stuff like a sponge. It's just great.
And that was Will Connolly. Now, life has also changed for the now former Senator, Fraser Anning. His party hit the skids in the May 2019 federal election, didn't win a single seat. Well, America's Cup racing is abandoned for the day. Our sports reporter Joe Porter is back with me now. What's gone wrong? Why can't we have the second race and get it done?
Well, Lisa, it's all because of these shifty Auckland winds. I know it's hard to put in layman's terms, but essentially when the two boats were going to appear around the North Head, there was going to be some wind coming from the southwest on one side of the course and wind coming from the northwest on the other side. So essentially, because of the shifting wind conditions, it's deemed that racing wouldn't be fair or competitive in race 10, so they've abandoned it for today. Obviously, they had to get the race started before 6 p.m. if they were going to go ahead. So, of course, now it comes down to tomorrow's race, the first one at 4:15, match point. Can Team New Zealand finally get the job done, or do Luna Rossa have something left in the tank?
OK, so who does that advantage, do you reckon?
Well, you'd have to say Luna Rossa. It gives them a chance to regroup, get back inside their team, figure out what went wrong today, that one crucial mistake we talked about earlier from Jimmy Spittle on the shifts. Can they adjust there? Can they come up with some different tactics tomorrow to throw Team New Zealand off their game? Are there bits that they can add to their boat that will help them in these shifting winds that we seem to be getting at the moment? So certainly I think it's an advantage to Luna Rossa. Team New Zealand would have liked to have gotten back out on the water straight away with the momentum, confidence high, and just put Luna Rossa to the sword, because we all know there would have been some self-doubt. There would have been Luna Rossa wondering what went wrong, and they haven't had a lot of time to debrief, so it would have put them on the back foot. But yeah, I think Luna Rossa benefit mostly from the delay. However, Team New Zealand on the front foot and still, odds on to take it out.
So tell me, why has these last couple of days been so exciting? Because you could say some of the races little ho-hum.
Absolutely. I mean, coming into this week, it was essentially whoever won the start was winning the race, and that was a little bit boring because people could sort of flick off after the first 5 minutes. But no, the last couple of races, and it all comes down to Course C, which we weren't, or the racing organisers weren't allowed to use during Level 2 and Level 3 lockdown. So Level 1, Alert Level, opens up Course C again. It's the one that's closest to the spectators and closest in the harbour. And because of these shifting winds we have, they go fantastic.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora ko Susana Leata with DNA. Team New Zealand will have to wait until tomorrow to try and wrap up their defence of the America's Cup. Decreasing winds have meant the second of today's two races against Luna Rossa on Auckland's Waitematā harbour has not been able to start prior to the 6 p.m. time limit for racing. In the day's first race, Team New Zealand again came from behind to claim victory by 30 seconds. The result took the defenders within one win of retaining the America's Cup in the best of 13 series. Aucklanders were out in droves on North Head to watch the action on the water. Andrew, who lives in Devonport, says his family aren't big yachting fans, but they couldn't turn down a viewpoint on their doorstep.
We thought it was very exciting. It took us a little while to realise or work out which leg was which and which part of the course was where. But once we did, it was very, very exciting.
Andrew, one of many people watching the America's Cup action from North Head, Auckland. A Trans-Tasman travel bubble lobby group is still hoping for an agreement before the end of the month. The Australia-New Zealand Leadership Forum has been working solidly for more than 10 months on an agreement to get quarantine-free travel between the two countries off the ground. A co-chair of the Leadership Forum, Anne Sherry, says they're still aiming for the end of March deadline.
Well, we've got 2 weeks to go, so never say never. I mean, everything's ready to go. The aviation sector's ready to go. We've been working on all the protocols for months. On the Australian side, there hasn't been a single case of COVID as a result of us having our borders open to Kiwis, and there's virtually no community transmission either side of the Tasman.
And Sherry says politicians are running out of excuses to prevent the bubble. Meanwhile, Queenstown Airport is forecasting a return to pre-pandemic passenger numbers by 2024. More than 2 million passengers went through the airport for the first time in 2018, and it's expecting to exceed it again in 2023. Plans in 2018 to allow double the number of flights in and out of the airport by 2045 outraged locals and led to the proposals being scrapped. Last year, the airport promised not to exceed the number of aircraft, not to increase the number of aircraft into Queenstown or to develop Wanaka Airport before July 2023. The opposition says the Trans-Tasman relationship is the worst it's been since the Muldoon years. The government is now dealing with a 15-year-old deportee from Australia whose circumstances are being kept private. Australia's decision to deport a minor has been roundly condemned in New Zealand. National leader Judith Collins says relations are at an historic low.
Lack of goodwill that I'm seeing at the moment. I've never seen Australian and New Zealand relations at such a low ebb since the days of Rob Muldoon, and I think it was Malcolm Fraser in those days.
Judith Collins. The government insists the relationship is unaffected, as New Zealand's position on Australian deportation is well known. The detective who discovered an Auckland man's body in a chest freezer says he had a gut feeling about what he could find. Jay Lingman denies murdering Denver Chance in 2019 but has pleaded guilty to 3 charges of possession of drugs for supply. In the High Court at Auckland, the Crown argues Mr Lingman shot Mr Chance 3 times in the head before using a chainsaw to fit the body into a freezer. Mr Lingman's lawyers say he acted in self-defence. Detective Senior Sergeant Callum McNeil, who found Mr Chance's body, says he thought at first that a blood smear on the freezer's lid could have been blood from a home kill, but he says instinct told him that Mr Chance's body was inside. A petition demanding improvements to ovarian cancer care and research has been presented to National MP Louise Upston. Petition organisers say this area of health has been ignored for too long, and they want national guidelines developed to diagnose the disease, as well as more government funding for treatment and research. More than 7,000 people have signed the petition. The Vatican says the Catholic Church does not have the power to bless same-sex unions. The Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, or CDF, says it is impossible for God to bless sin, but notes the positive elements in same-sex relationships. Last October, Pope Francis said he thought same-sex couples should be allowed civil unions. Some parishes in recent months, including Germany and the US, have started giving blessings to people in same-sex relationships as a way to welcome gay Catholics to the church. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. As you heard in the news, Team New Zealand have one hand on the America's Cup after going 6-3 up with a victory over Luna Rossa in race 9 on the Waitematā harbour in Auckland this afternoon. The defenders are now just one win away from retaining the trophy. Just one race was possible today, with fickle winds forcing race director Ian Murray to abandon the second race, which could have seen Team New Zealand claim the Auld Mug. Luna Rossa appeared on track to make the score 5-4 in today's opener, leading around the first 4 marks, but Team New Zealand, under helmsman Peter Burling, reeled in the Italians on the penultimate leg to round the 5th mark 18 seconds in front and eventually win by half a minute.
Pretty tight race all in all, and one little right shift up that last beat really decided it for us. Good fun racing, it's great to be back in here on course C and having a good battle with a really good team, but it's great to walk away with another win as well.
Peter Burling. Liverpool's beaten Wolverhampton Wanderers 1-0 to remain in contention for a top 4 finish in English football's Premier League. The result lifts Liverpool 2 places to 6th, 5 points adrift of 4th placed Chelsea and 2 behind 5th placed West Ham. Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua have signed a 2-fight deal to unify the IBF, WBO, WBA and WBC heavyweight titles. And Tokyo Olympic organisers say the torch relay will begin as planned on March 25th. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Farid Ahmed, who lost his wife in the Christchurch terror attacks, talks about forgiveness and love. Jamie Tahana speaks to us between legs of the Te Araroa Trail. He's made it to the Mackenzie country now, and Nina Hall on the geopolitics of COVID vaccines and a proposal to waive patents on them to speed up global production. The developing world's keen, the EU and USA less so. On Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
A short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, mostly cloudy with a few showers. Waikato to Wellington, also Bay of Plenty, Central North Island and Wairarapa. Scattered rain clearing tonight, fine weather tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay partly cloudy, a few showers spreading north this evening. Nelson, Bulla, Westland and Marlborough except Kaikoura Coast. Fine apart from a few showers in Bulla clearing today. Canterbury and Kaikoura Coast, showers, some heavy with thunderstorms and hail spreading north and clearing from the south. Fine with morning and evening cloud tomorrow. For Otago, Southland and Fiordland except Clutha. Fine spells, a few showers especially in the south, clearing tomorrow afternoon. And Chatham Islands mostly cloudy, rain tonight, brief clear skies tomorrow morning, then showers tomorrow evening. RNZ National. It's coming up to 8 minutes past 6.
Kia ora anō, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A Waikato business that was first to benefit from a controversial government fund to protect tourism assets has turned down another $2 million of help it was due. More than 90% of Discover Waitomo's business is usually from international visitors, but with the borders closed due to COVID, it got a $2 million grant from the Strategic Tourism Assets Protection Program to help save jobs and businesses essential to local communities. An additional $2 million loan facility was also made available to Discover Waitomo, but it had to accept the line of credit before the end of the month or the offer expires. Discover Waitomo is owned by Tourism Holdings. I asked Chief Executive Grant Webster to explain his decision.
The offer of a loan, we're not taking up the offer of the loan, and the simple reason is that from a debt position, THL has managed its balance sheet pretty well, so we can manage any sort of funding ourselves.
So you don't need it, basically?
We don't need the loan, that's right.
When you say you don't need the loan, if it was a grant, would you take it?
If it was a grant and we had the opportunity to do what we've done with the previous grant, which is save more jobs and create more jobs, we would certainly look at that, yes.
Is it just that taking that extra $2 million as a debt just adds to your problem, in essence?
Well, we will be going into debt for Waitomo. So Waitomo is what we applied for the STAP funding, not the rest of the THL business. And Waitomo is still going into debt because it's still losing money at the moment. And it will do for the foreseeable future until borders open. But we can fund that ourselves out of the fact, essentially, that we've been selling motorhomes and we've been creating debt reduction from that perspective. So we are subsidising Waitomo ourselves. But if there was an opportunity for a grant for more job creation, then obviously job creation and building things out in Waitomo is something that we're keen to do.
So then why couldn't you subsidise it right from the get-go?
Because this is about the commercial decisions about how many jobs you can save and how you can keep a business open. So the reality is that what we faced a year ago was a situation, and we're still facing now, it's a situation where we are operating a business at a loss, and we are protecting jobs and saving jobs at the expense of THL shareholders. And we can do that, and we're prepared to do that to an extent. The government's grant and STAP loan meant that we could keep more jobs than what we would have, and we could keep more of the business open than what we would have otherwise.
So what exactly did that $2 million go on? How many jobs did it save?
About 35 jobs.
Originally, estimates were around 40 when Calvin Davis, who was Tourism Minister at the time, came on the program. Was it not possible to stretch it that far?
It's very close. There's a combination of full-time and part-time, and there's been a few changes of roles. So it's around that 35 to 40 mark, but yeah, around that number, so pretty close.
So what would have happened if you hadn't had that money? Would you have just let those people go?
That's what we were facing, yes.
Okay. So can you give us a bit of an idea of how things are at the moment? Obviously, the border is still closed. You say there's still pressure here, that Waitomo is going to have to go into debt to keep its doors open. Can you paint a bit of a picture? What's the past year been like compared to others?
So there's no year that I'm aware of that has been as bad as the last 12 months in tourism in New Zealand and in Waitomo in particular. So within Waitomo, we are losing money at the moment. We are keeping the doors open for domestic, and that's keeping people in jobs. So that's a good thing. But yes, we are losing money, and we see that we will continue to lose money keeping the doors open until such time as borders open. What we are seeing, and we are very grateful for from the government, is the Department of Conservation plan, the Work for Nature plan, the Kaimahi for Nature. So we have about 10, depending again on the different projects, but between 10 and 15 people that we've been able to have part-time jobs for that have been able to get full-time employment by balancing out that work for Kaimahi for Nature. So that's a very positive program that's benefiting the environment and the region and creating more jobs.
So how much are you losing?
That's not a figure that we disclose, and obviously we're a publicly listed company, but it's well in the hundreds of thousands.
Well, let me put it another way. How long can you sustain those losses at Waitomo if the border remains closed?
Yeah, look, what we are planning on, so what we could actually sustain and what we're looking at the moment is we have an expectation that borders will open within a 12-month period, and we are operating to that expectation. If something changed our expectations around that, then we would revisit it, but we can operate, we're prepared to sustain the losses at least for the next 12 months, and we think things will be changing from that point. And potentially, obviously, a lot earlier with the Trans-Tasman bubble.
Do you actually have faith that the Trans-Tasman bubble is going to get off the ground? And if so, when?
I remain enthusiastic and positive because that's the best thing to do. And definitely there seems to be a lot more pressure building around that. There seems to be a lot more data that suggests that, it would work well in terms of community cases and lack thereof. So, yes, remain really positive and certainly think hopefully by the middle of this year.
So would that save Waitomo?
I don't know yet what the Australian market would do exactly. It would certainly keep us, well, we're keeping the doors open anyway, but if we were just Australia for a long, long period of time, I'd say we'd still be able to operate, yes. What the long-term nature of the business would be, who knows? But we're not going to have international borders closed forever, so I think the Trans-Tasman bubble would enable us to employ more people and be more positive about the longer-term position for those businesses.
And just for clarity, when you say you're working on international borders beyond Australia opening within a year, what's your year that you're doing the calculations on? From now? A year from now? Or?
Yeah, I'm looking now, early calendar 2022, yep.
And if you don't get that, is there a possibility that Waitomo Caves could fold?
Oh, it's too iconic to fold. But what you end up looking at, if it's longer than that, then you end up looking at what days it's open of the week. You look at, you're looking at more job losses, more loss of all the IP, more loss of the impact of the Māori in the region as well. It is part of the life force of Waitomo. It's a very tight-knit community. So it would be devastating if it was longer than 12 months, but I can't see with THL involved that we would close it per se. But, being more restricted because there was no activities a reality.
That being the case then, if you've got a bigger company, as you do have, with tourism holdings behind Waitomo, were you a worthy recipient of that $2 million to begin with?
Absolutely, because what you've got to come back to is this was about two key things, right? So this was about creating jobs and enabling as much of the business to remain open as it possibly could. So that was the intent from the government at the time, and that's what we absolutely delivered to. What we've got to remember as well, the THL cut dividends to shareholders straight away. So in February last year, we cut dividends. THL has been making a loss in its entire business and continues to make a loss at this point in time. So when you look at that and say, it's not like we had shareholders that benefited, we've definitely been in substantial losses, and we protected jobs, and that's where the money went, and we've kept an iconic tourism asset operating for domestic and ready for international. I think it ticked every box of the original intention.
And that was Tourism Holdings boss Grant Webster. Now, as part of the same funding program, AJ Hackett was given a $5 million grant and was offered $5 million as a loan. The bungee company is still actively considering a draft version of the loan, but is yet to confirm if they want to go ahead with it. Meanwhile, the Auditor General's office is investigating whether all applications to the Strategic Tourism Assets Protection Program were treated in the same way. It is 17 minutes after 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Last year, deaths from ovarian cancer topped the road toll, yet people with the disease say it's an ignored crisis. Today, a petition with more than 7,000 signatures calling for national diagnostic guidelines to be developed, better treatment options as well as more government funding was presented to MPs on the steps of Parliament. Those steps were covered in white crosses, 182 to be exact, the number of people who died last year of the disease. Emma Hatton was there.
182 sisters, mothers, daughters and friends who lose their lives to ovarian cancer every year. So much has changed in the previous 12 months, but for women with ovarian cancer, everything remains devastatingly the same.
A powerful message from Jane Ludeman on the steps of Parliament this afternoon before presenting a petition signed by thousands to the National Party MP Louise Upston. It calls for national guidelines so the cancer can be diagnosed more quickly, better funding and research, and a call to take what's been shelved for decades as a woman's issue for what it really is, a crisis. Petition co-organiser Tash Crosby was diagnosed with the cancer in 2017.
And it was an absolutely isolating time. I was handed a slip of paper from an overseas charity, and that's when I thought, holy shit, I'm actually battling this on my own. And I'm sick of every day hearing horrible stories of women whose symptoms were sort of fobbed off for this, that and the other as women's issues.
She says the only reason she's still here is because she fought for further testing after being discharged from hospital for the third time with just a packet of Panadol. Ovarian cancer is the least survivable women's cancer, and the survival rate is less than half that of those diagnosed with breast or prostate cancer. Jane Ludeman says it's woefully underfunded.
At a government level, we're not funding anything in regards to awareness, and we most years don't fund any research. It's actually one of our least funded cancers in New Zealand.
Liz Pennington from Rural Women NZ says for women who are physically isolated, it's even harder to get help.
It's just the compounded issues of access, and access to screening and access to treatment, and the requirements of travel and just the difficulties and the challenges. I think the key thing, and with the great work Jane and Tash are doing, is that they're reaching out and wanting to make sure that all women have access to information and good support. So it's an all-of-women approach.
Turning out to support was Eleanor, a local nurse who has late-stage ovarian cancer, first thought to be a stone in her gallbladder.
Started with having feeling of bloatedness in my abdomen. I had ultrasound, but didn't show anything. So that's why this type of cancer is detected at a later stage already. It's already late.
The National Party leader, Judith Collins, was there and says it's not clear why this type of cancer appears to have been ignored for so long.
Well, I think it's a failure right through the system, and what we're seeing here today are two very brave women who are saying, this is what happened to me, and that takes a huge amount of courage.
And Jane Ludeman, Tash Crosby and the hundreds of others battling, recovering or yet to be diagnosed with ovarian cancer are hoping that courage translates into action, and fast. For Checkpoint, Emma Hatton.
The detective who discovered Auckland man Denver Chance's body in a chest freezer says his gut feeling told him what he would find. Jay Lingman is on trial in the High Court at Auckland, charged with Mr Chance's murder in 2019. He denies murdering Mr Chance by fatally shooting him, but has pleaded guilty to 3 charges of possession of drugs for supply. Jean Bell reports from the High Court at Auckland, and a warning, this story may upset some listeners.
The Crown argues Jay Lingman shot Denver Chance 3 times in the head before using a chainsaw to fit the body into the freezer. Today, the court heard from Detective Senior Sergeant Callum McNeil, who found Mr Chance's body. Answering questions from Crown Prosecutor Gareth Kays, Detective McNeil recalled the police search that led to the discovery. He went with 2 other officers to visit the property. No one was at the house, so the police searched the rest of the property. Detective McNeil checked out a shed with another officer.
As I approached the shed, I noted that there was a security fence around it. I could also see CCTV cameras on the shed, which I found interesting as the house itself had no apparent CCTV outside that.
There was a large cool room inside the shed, similar to a commercial kitchen cold room.
Once inside, it was pitch black. There was just no light inside at all. I had to turn on a torch just to have a quick look around.
What the light revealed was a drug lab and a cannabis grow room.
At that stage, it struck me as being a clandestine type lab, drug lab. There was what appeared to be grow lights hanging from chains from the ceiling. There was ventilation ducting inside the room.
Detective McNeil recalled seeing cannabis plant leaves and stalk inside a bucket, but no plants were being grown at that time. He spotted 2 pill presses along with bowls and a granite mortar and pestle, believed to be used in MDMA pill production. On their way out, Mr McNeil noticed the chest freezer with what appeared to be a blood smear on the lid.
That sort of stopped me in my tracks. I went back to look at it. My thoughts at that time were the fact that it was a rural environment. Potentially an animal had been butchered for the meat and put in the freezer, which may account for the blood smearing. But my gut feeling was that Denver was inside.
Detective McNeil was shocked by the discovery of Mr Chance's body inside the freezer.
It took me a few seconds just for my mind to process exactly what I was looking at.
Earlier, Detective Anna Fager told the court 8.1 grams of MDMA were found in the shed and another 7.6 grams of MDMA crystals were found under Mr Lingman's bed. About 200 green tablets containing the drug were also found. She said multiple bags of cocaine containing a total of about 55 grams and a Ziploc bag containing about 750 grams of diphenidine, a dissociative drug, was also in the fridge. The defence argues the 2 men were drug dealers and Mr Lingman was acting in self-defence after Mr Chance believed he was being ripped off. The trial continues. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Jean Bao tēnei.
Europe is facing rising COVID-19 infections, with Italy back in lockdown. It was the first country in the world to impose a national lockdown last year when the pandemic hit. Now, for the 3rd time, all non-essential shops, businesses and schools have closed. The BBC's Mark Lowen reports from Milan.
Well, the beautiful blue skies of Milan belie the dark clouds of COVID gathering yet again, because just over a year since Italy became the first country in the world to impose a national lockdown, it is shutting its doors once again. This region, Lombardy, the original epicenter of the first wave, is now one of 11 regions in Italy, that's over half the country, in which schools, shops, restaurants are closing as part of a red zone. And for 3 days across the Easter holiday, the whole of Italy will become a red zone, so there will be closures right across this country. Italy is now in a 3rd wave of the virus, with infections likely to peak in 6 or 7 days. And while some here support the tightening of the measures, for many, well, they feel at the end of their tether.
We know it's necessary, but we are very tired, so I hope that this is the last one.
We feel pretty dreadful. It's like back to square one after a year. It's incredible that the government, the schools haven't had the chance to think about an alternative. We look at Israel, we look at the US, and we look at the UK thinking, wow, things are working there. Yeah.
And here?
Not really.
Italy's vaccinations have indeed been sluggish, partly due to supply problems. But from today, they've pledged to almost double daily shots in a mass national mobilisation, a gradual relief to a nation that suffered so much.
And that was Mark Lowen reporting. Amateur historians have made one of the biggest ever archaeological discoveries from the First World War. It's the site of a German tunnel near the French city of Reims and the last resting place of nearly 300 German soldiers who were trapped there and died an agonising death during a French offensive in 1917. The BBC's Hugh Schofield has been taken to the place.
Juste en voyant ça, vous imaginez là comment les gars ils ont explosé, ils sont partout ça.
We're walking through woods along what were once German lines on a ridge that the French call the Chemin des Dames. My guide is Pierre Malinowski, ex-soldier, bit of a maverick. It's he who's uncovered the secret we've come to see, the entrance to the Winterberg Tunnel. Already the looters have been here, and it's a great, great shame. It's very important that this place gets police protection as soon as possible, because it's a very special place here, one of the last untold, unexplored secrets of the First World War.
Adieu l'amour, adieu.
The 1917 Chemin des Dames offensive is the French Somme, a disastrous and pointless hell. The worst of it was here at the village of Craonne, commemorated in this famous wartime lament.
C'est à Craonne, sur le plateau.
The ridge that the French were trying to take was riddled with German defences. On the 5th of May, they unleashed a massive bombardment, targeting the two ends of the Winterberg Tunnel. There was a direct hit. The German soldiers were trapped inside, and over the next few days, as oxygen ran out one by one, they died. Some asked comrades to shoot them to spare them the agony. Only 3 survived, and one, Karl Fisser, left an account.
How long we were trapped, I cannot say. 3 or 4 days. Some raved about rescue, others for water. One comrade lay on the ground next to me and croaked with a breaking voice for someone to load his pistol for him.
Finding the tunnel after all this time took years of detective work by Pierre Malinowski's father Alain, but no one was interested, so last year Pierre decided to act alone. Risking prosecution, he came one night with a mechanical digger, and what he found proved that this was indeed the site. Not everyone is pleased. Deanne Temple-Bornet speaks for the German War Graves Commission, the Volksbund. She told German radio that sites like this were better left untouched.
To be honest, we are not very excited about the discovery. We find it almost unfortunate. What's going to happen next? The problem is that once you've opened a tunnel, you either have to guard it or retrieve the dead, because stealing from graves is very in vogue.
But now that it's been established that this is the tunnel, interest is growing. Back at the tunnel, Pierre Malinowski is calling the police and the préfet to urge them to patrol the site and ward off more grave robbers. His unorthodox approach has worked. The French and German governments might have preferred to let dead soldiers lie in peace, but now they're going to have to step in.
And that was Hugh Schofield reporting. Bit of feedback before we go on the Trans-Tasman bubble. Pat says, we can't open an Aussie bubble because we're garbage. Peter Dutton collectively labelled us all, and Aussie certainly won't want to do a garbage bubble. On the America's Cup, hey, we've got our own crew here at Checkpoint. We'll be all fired up and ready to go tomorrow, so do tune in for what's going on the course. We'll have all the news and updates for you then.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The second of today's America's Cup races has had to be called off due to the wind not being right. The first race this afternoon saw Team New Zealand finish 30 seconds ahead of Luna Rossa, giving them just one more race to win before holding on to the Cup. The opposition says the issue of the 15-year-old deportee being sent to New Zealand by Canberra